This is a crime investigation, and SLED, our state police agency, is handling that, and we are working with them to provide them any information and support.
A second autopsy complete. A second investigation is underway, and a reward is being offered for information about the death of Stephen Smith. Thanks for joining us for Law and Crime's Sidebar podcast. I'm Angenette Levy. Sandy Smith has been demanding answers in the death of her son Stephen since 2015. She and many of the law enforcement officers who worked on his case never believed that he died as the result of a hit and run. Over the weekend, experts hired by Smith's lawyers performed a second autopsy on Stephen and examined the road where his body was found. Dr. Michelle DuPre oversaw the exhumation of Stephen Smith's body and the second autopsy.
We actually went to the gravesite on Friday. We exhumed the body and then transported it to Tampa, Florida, under police escort the entire time. The autopsy, second autopsy, was done on Saturday morning. I was present. We had a forensic anthropologist on board, as well as the forensic pathologist who actually performed the autopsy. All of this was viewed and photographed by our law enforcement that accompanied us in the body there. It was then transported back to South Carolina on Saturday and then reburied on Sunday.
You said by police escort. Was the casket driven or was it flown or how did this occur?
Well, it was in a vault, and so it was removed. The casket was removed from the vault in South Carolina, and the casket, along with the body, was not opened. It was transported in a van by vehicle to Tampa and then opened at the second lab.
How difficult is it to exhume a body after almost 8 years? Obviously, depending on the conditions in the grave and what happened in the embalming process, I would assume sometimes these bodies can be well preserved and the work can be done efficiently and effectively. But, is there a challenge that this passage of time poses?
Well, yes, there is always a challenge because this is a second autopsy. So you are relooking at everything that has been done. And then, as you mentioned, the condition of the body may also play a role. We were very fortunate in this case. We actually completed an entire second forensic autopsy, and we were able to get everything that we needed to move forward.
Dr. DuPre won't discuss the results of the second autopsy at this time because the final reports are not complete. But she said she and the forensic anthropologist who examines bones, Dr. Heather Walsh Haney, and the pathologist who performed the autopsy, Dr. Dan Schultz, were able to come to a conclusion about Stephen's death.
Not knowing what condition we might find the body in, we wanted to make sure that we had all of our bases covered. And as you said, because this is, determining partly on the bone fragments or the skull, we wanted to make sure we had someone there that could look at that.
How difficult is that when you're dealing with injuries to bone? I know that obviously you want to look at something as early as you can in the process, but is that a difficult field or is that, I mean, can you come to different conclusions based on, one person looking at it versus another?
Well, you can always have differing opinions. However, again, we're very fortunate that bones last pretty much forever. And we can often tell, especially it's been 8 years, and that is not that long in relative terms for us to re-examine a body. And so again, the bones were in very good condition, and the body was as well. I mean, we were able to see things that we needed to see. And so, because we had the forensic anthropologist there, I think that was just an added level of confidence that we had.
Interesting. So do you think we're getting closer to some concrete answers about Stephen's passing following the second autopsy?
I think so. I think that again, any investigation, we look at that totality of circumstances, which surrounding the entire death, not just the autopsy, not just the scene, but all the factors taken into consideration. And I think the second autopsy that was done, along with some of the information from the first autopsy, which, by the way, I think this should be said, the original autopsy was very professional. It was a very professional and well done autopsy. So when we take a look at everything, then the investigation can put that together, and that's where law enforcement comes in, and they will be doing, the lead on that investigation. We'll be supporting them any way we can.
I think it's interesting you brought that up. The first autopsy conducted by Dr. Erin Presnell. I read the report. Obviously, she did her due diligence. You read everything that she went through, and it's thorough. It is thorough. She just believed, for whatever reason, because Stephen's body was in the middle of the road, that this was a death caused by a hit and run. By a vehicle, and despite there being no debris from a vehicle present, and she listed it as undetermined. So I find that a little bit strange, just because of the circumstances surrounding it. But you're saying this was a professional autopsy, and when I asked you a prior question, you said experts can come to different conclusions and disagree.
Well, there's two things, and you make an excellent point. An autopsy is an opinion of that person, the pathologist doing the exam. So it is an opinion. I do say it was a professional autopsy and thorough. And unfortunately, the other thing that you said is that because the body was in the road, and that was just an unfortunate statement, really. If we find a body in a swimming pool, we don't say they drowned because they were in the pool. We say they drowned because of the evidence. And again, that I think it was a misstatement. I think she probably regrets it. And it just got sort of misconstrued from there. But it was a very professional autopsy.
There's been so much hay made about the fact that Stephen, his genital area was swabbed for potential DNA. It's my understanding, with the circumstances surrounding this case, you have a young man whose body was found in the middle of a road, and this could very well be, we don't know what happened. Is that uncommon? Because I would think that that would be part of something. If you're looking at something as a potential homicide, that would be, I've talked to people who tell me that was not unusual, that was done.
You're right. Anytime that we have a sort of unusual circumstances, it's not uncommon to do a sexual assault kit on males or females. And the other point that you brought up earlier is that this was signed out as undetermined. And as you know, there's really only 5 manners of death, accident, homicide, suicide, natural, or undetermined. And undetermined leaves that case open for new information to be found and then continued. So essentially, it was never really a closed case. And in this case, the sexual assault kit was done on Stephen for, I think, a variety of reasons. And I think that was a good thing.
As that second autopsy was being conducted, other investigation was underway at the scene on Sandy Run Road, where Stephen's body was found in the early morning hours of July 8th, 2015. Remember Dr. Kenneth Kinsey from the Alex Murdaugh trial? He was the state's reconstruction expert for the crime scene at Moselle. Well, he is now leading the investigation into Stephen Smith's death. Where do you start on a case like this, where, this is an almost 8-year-old case? So where do you start when you look at when you look at Stephen Smith's murder? Where do you start in reevaluating that?
Well, you start at the beginning, Angenette. I got the case files and looked at the original scene, went to both locations, spent a day this weekend doing my own measurements, finding the location, seeing what has remained constant and seeing what has changed.
What have you found so far in reviewing this case?
Well, as I just said, a lot of it is verifying, seeing what's constant, what has changed. If I'm ever put in a position where I have to testify, I wanted to have my own data as much as I can depend on the part that hasn't changed. So it was important for me to visit both scenes and try to figure out the possible, I guess, the possible paths that Stephen might have traveled that night. Every possibility, if he wasn't picked up, I got to look at it from all sides, and I'm trying to keep an open mind. Mm-hmm. So I did a lot of walking and in the woods, out of the woods, on the pavement, a lot of measurement. I'd start over and get back in the vehicle and clock it again and used some Google Earth and some satellite imagery, that kind of thing. And I met some folks and spoke to some people along the way, and it was interesting. And it was a pretty full day.
Interesting. One of the things, when you look at the case file and you look at the notes from the highway patrol troopers who were investigating this, they didn't think from the very beginning that this was a hit and run. They thought this was, I guess, a homicide, and that Stephen Smith died in some other way other than being struck by a vehicle. Do you share that opinion?
It is really too early for me to even have an opinion at this point. Like I said, I want to look at every different scenario, every possibility. And then if I uncover something, I've been retained by Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter, their firm. If I obtain something that's useful, it's passed on immediately, because we don't want to contradict any criminal investigation that's going on. I am a law enforcement officer, but I have no jurisdiction in Hampton. Right. So we're kind of running a parallel investigation, and hopefully we may find something that helps SLED or the local authorities, whichever. Hopefully we'll locate something.
You mentioned SLED and that this is a parallel investigation. As a law enforcement officer, sometimes I feel like, when I've observed criminal investigations unfold, a lot of times police, they don't want people involved in their investigation. They don't want a parallel investigation, but it appears that SLED is open to this, that they've reached out and said to Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter that they would partner with them or collaborate in some fashion as much as they could or were willing to. So do you find that unusual that SLED is willing to work on this with them?
Well, I think SLED is like the rest of our team members. They want to get answers for the Smith family. And there are certainly things that they can't include us in. There are certain things that Mr. Bland and Mr. Richter have are privy to that I'm not privy to. And I understand that. There's certain things they shouldn't tell us, or I shouldn't know, because I don't want to compromise the way I come into this, my integrity. And sometimes you can form biases about what happened subconsciously. So I'm just trying to go into it with an open mind and let them do their part and stay out of their way. And when they need me to be a part of something that they're doing, I'm certainly here and available.
Do you find this to be an unusual case?
Well, yes and no. There are things that really disturb me about this case. The position of Mr. Smith, and it's all out there. I'm not putting anything out there that's not already there, but just the unknown answers to common questions. I can't say that any of it's unique, but I'm saying especially like, and it's in the FOIAs and in the Highway Patrol reports, the lack of car parts or artifacts from a vehicle there, the lack of extremity injuries on Mr. Smith. But I'm not closing my mind to that, because sometimes it does happen this way. So for me to do my part with integrity, it's like I told you, I believe, with the Murdaugh case, I'm letting the evidence take me where it takes me. And then hopefully if I discover something, or if another team member discovers something, hopefully we'll be able to put it together in the end, and we'll be able to help the men and women at SLED and get some answers. We're going to consider everything, and we're going to look into as much as we can look into. So no matter how small, somebody knows something. And you look at every possibility of Mr. Smith's death. There are 4 or 5 distinct possibilities, and we're not ruling any of those out. So if somebody heard something or knows something, we're asking them to please come forward, because we can include it or exclude it, and then we can get back where we need to be. If it takes us in the right direction, it's helpful. If not, we can exclude it. Then we don't go down that avenue anymore. But I'm not discounting anything at this point in time. And as far as I know, my clients, Bland and Richter, and all the other team members, they're not discounting anything either.
When you said there are 4 to 5 distinct possibilities here, I mean, I think of at least 2. The fact that maybe it's possible that he was hit by a passing vehicle. I don't know that. Maybe something was sticking out of a vehicle. He could have been hit in the head and then placed there by somebody. Are there some possibilities I haven't thought of?
Well, no, you think you named 2, but you really named 4.
3.
Because,
Oh, I thought I did
well,
3.
3.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, you've got somebody hitting him with a vehicle,
Right.
knowing or unknowing. That's
Sure.
2. Somebody hitting him with something hanging out of a vehicle, knowing or unknowing. That's 2 more. Or the worst case scenario, what you said, someone picked Mr. Smith up or did him some harm somewhere else and then dropped him at that location. So we've got to consider all different angles, because this, as mentioned, the Smith family deserves answers, but they deserve the best answers and the most correct answers.
So far, more than $120,000 has been raised by Sandy Smith through a GoFundMe page. She raised that money to pay for the exhumation, the second autopsy, and for experts to be hired to conduct that second independent investigation. $35,000 of that money is now being offered as a reward for information that leads to the arrest and conviction of Stephen Smith's killer or killers. Tips can be emailed to SLED at tips@sled.sc.gov, or they can be called in by dialing 803-737-9000.